Hello, everybody! It's been a while, hasn't it? And I figure I'm about ready now to make content again. But for now, it's not going to be necessarily about Nicaragua. Sometimes it will. I'm just going to sit down and talk about certain things that come to mind to no schedule at all whatsoever. So this video is going to be about a belief that I have. Now, in any of these videos, I'm going to talk about things that you don't agree with. And I want to encourage you to remember that this is what I believe. I'm not saying I'm right for you. My beliefs aren't right for most people. I have come to understand that when one truly cares for others and wishes to treat others respectfully and with kindness and make a genuine impact in their life, that was impossible where I was living and in the culture that I lived within. So sometimes now I think I'm ready to start talking about what I've learned about our society and our humanity. Because I see now that as a child growing up, I was very, very, very much misled about what it means to be born in the 2000s or close to it or a bit after it. Basically, we pitched to the children that we've figured everything out because of technology and democracy and freedom. And you don't need to worry about diplomacy or being understanding of other people's cultures anymore because we just killed all those people or we've manipulated them into being obsessed about our culture when their history shows that we've just betrayed them. We've done horrible, horrible things all over the world as an American. That's my American shame. I don't want to put that on you. And this video isn't going to be about my American shame. That'll be another thing. For now, what I want to talk to you about is the collapse of the formal education system. I don't believe that this is something that has happened. I believe that it has already happened. And I'll get into the details of why now. Because it's not like schools are failing, okay? Don't get me wrong. Schools are actually doing really well, specifically universities in the United States. Oh, they're making a lot of money. And this is kind of the problem. That is the collapse. I'm not saying that our education system is going to collapse. I'm saying that it already did. And it was fundamentally replaced by a for-profit business model over the past, let's say, 3 decades. Now we live in a time where you need to be born into a family who can afford to get you educated for hundreds of thousands of dollars without burdening you with student debt. If that doesn't happen, you are going to be worse off than your parents. And most people in the United States who are at the age of 30 or 40 do not get to experience the lifestyle that their parents did. And this is where education comes in. I gotta back this up. I can't just say that our education system has collapsed, can I? Because, I mean, people still get degrees, they get jobs, they earn money. So it's doing something, right? And here's the thing. Education itself is a leveraging tool. So your ability to get a use out of your education, whether you want to admit this or not, fundamentally depends on those around you who you are competing with being less educated than you. You see what I'm getting at here? The very foundation of getting educated relies on other people not being educated, right? And that's where it starts. And it's great. It's awesome. Like if you take a country like Nicaragua, here you can get educated and get a college degree for free. If you just test well, your school is completely free, pretty much. And especially by US standards, completely free, way cheaper. The problem is it's really hard to find work. But that being said, it's incredibly hard to find work without a college degree as well. So it does make it a bit easier for you to get a job, and you don't go into student loan debt by doing it. So why not just get educated, right? You know, it's a different situation here. When you're surrounded by people who are relatively uneducated, the value of education is very high. And this is where we kind of lie, and our society tricks people. because we like to make it seem that the value of education in a developing country and the value of education in a highly developed country are equal. And this is not true at all. And education is much more valuable in a developing country. And there's a whole lot more that I could get into about that, about societally, about how where I grew up, mostly in the US, if you're smart or geeky or nerdy, people make fun of you. Like, they don't, like, respect smartness. And, like, in my life, for asking questions, I am pushed away. As an American, I am often in situations where I know better but to keep my mouth shut, because if I point out the obvious hypocrisy, people are gonna blame me for it, right? They're gonna get frustrated and associate me with it. Like, for example, I'll do one right now and I can alienate you. So, growing up, I learned a lot about freedom and democracy. And one of the things I have a huge issue with in the United States is that we teach our children that we ended World War II by dropping atomic bombs on Japan, and it scared them so shitless that they surrendered. Okay. Yes. Whatever. I believed it too. I thought that, oh yeah, we had no choice. And don't get me wrong, the Japanese, the things that they did in those times were absolutely horrific. Just as horrific as all the horrible things we paid people to do. I'm by no means trying to defend the actions of the Japanese. But what I am pointing out is that we teach people that these atomic bombs ended the war. Okay, whatever. Let's put that aside for a second. Did you know that the atomic bombs weren't actually the most effective military weapon systems we used on Japan? Because the atomic bombs cost so much to produce. Even if you consider them killing 100,000 people in a city as all military people, which obviously that's not true, they were civilians. Most of them were civilians. Almost all of them were civilians, right? Even then, if you look at the amount of military people killed compared to the money spent, it was an inordinate waste of money. Huge waste of money. And I'm telling you this because we had something better. You see, we had incendiary bombs. And the funny thing is that before we dropped atomic bombs on Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we actually had already completely destroyed their capital in the most eventful human death 24-hour period in all of this Earth's history. Yes, the United States, my country, is the one behind the largest human death event in history, and we don't teach about it. It's called the firebombing of Tokyo. You may know about it, because now it's very much a real thing. You can learn about it, but we don't like to talk about it because it makes it look kind of bad, you know what I mean? I mean, we slaughtered 100,000 people in 24 hours, and not by accident either. We made like little wooden villages in the desert, and then we tried, and we were like, whoa, this burns so well, this is just gonna burn all these people alive. And we did that. We did that to Tokyo, and we completely eradicated their capital. I find this quite interesting because as a kid, I was told that we attacked Hiroshima and Nagasaki as acts of mercy because we didn't want to just ruin their capital straight away. You see how filthy that is to tell a child? How disgusting, how abjectly disrespectful it is to human life to teach people this nonsense. The reality is, we vaporized hundreds of thousands of people so that we could give a middle finger to the Soviet Union, and that is all. It was a test. We wanted to see what happens if an atomic bomb actually gets dropped on a city of civilians. Because this is our chance to do it now, and we can explain it off. And yeah, okay, you're gonna be like, look, Jack, it was to save American lives. Okay, look. If you know anything about military history, there's one word. It's called a embargo. All right? You surround an island, and then the island can't get what it needs to wage war. And eventually, they have to surrender or starve. And I'm not saying that the Japanese could have simply been contained like this from the beginning, but by the time we had destroyed their capital, eradicated loads of human life, We probably could have just waited. Or we could have blown a bomb up in a field somewhere to prove a point. But that wouldn't have gotten us all the juicy death, would it? It wouldn't have gotten us all of those details about what happens to humans when an atomic bomb blows up in a populated city. And there you go. You can see that if you actually start asking questions, people treat you like crap. They push you away. They don't like having to think about these things and noticing the contradictions in our society, right? We have no right to talk to anybody about freedom or democracy or even women's rights. Because when you look at the history of all the places with bad women's rights right now, we've been fucking around there arming terrorists and funding rebellions for decades, purposefully to keep the countries destabilized so that they can't threaten our interests. That to me does not sound very democratic. And personally, as an American, thinking this way, I was essentially pushed out of the country. As you can see, it's not easy to talk about this stuff. And when you speak about this kind of thing with other Americans, they do not like it. They really do not. And this has to do with the collapse of the education. Because I'm telling you, education isn't education. It has nothing to do with teaching children how to learn and how to teach themselves. In fact, education is actually the opposite. We influence people to stop trusting their own observations and to just do as they are told so that we can churn out the factory workers to have all of our factories full. Unfortunately, this is a pretty outdated mentality. We kind of adjusted it a bit for the offices, but now we're having problems because all those jobs are getting automated and it's the cotton mill all over again and everyone's all fussed. And at the end of the day, come on, none of these jobs really matter that much because at the end of the day, we live in a world that is made for rich people to make a lot of money off of loads and loads and loads and loads of poor people, okay? And unfortunately, education itself has become a mechanism to allow for more of this to happen. And I don't want to just criticize, I want to offer solutions, right? Because personally, I have found a way to live that works for me. But that being said, I understand this is impossible for other people because I had to alienate and isolate myself to live this way. Because we are so propagandized into believing that money and work is above all else. And yeah, you're gonna say, no, I work to provide for my family. No, most people do not. That is a lie they tell themselves. They do not prioritize their family or themselves or their friends. They prioritize the imagery of a job or work or money. And I now live in a country that is under dictatorship, is supposedly completely impoverished. And don't get me wrong, Nicaraguans do not have the material access to most other, compared to people in the US. And don't get me wrong, people here are often very, very ignorant and uneducated. Most Nicaraguans I know idolize the United States. They do not believe the things that I talk about. They look at 2018 and they think it had nothing to do with the US. When I show them things that were made outside of Nicaragua about what my country is doing, nothing to do with their government, they claim it's Sandinista propaganda. And you know why? Because we have been waging war on this country for multiple decades. And we never stopped. That 2018 stuff, that was us. That wasn't just a natural Nicaraguan thing. And you don't believe me? Well, that's fine. But you have to explain why we accepted all of Nicaragua's political prisoners related to that event a year or two later. We took in 200-something political prisoners from a Latin American nation. Come on. When did we do that? Why would we do that? We send criminals to Latin America. We don't bring them back. So very clearly, we had actually instigated this, and we brought our people back because we had some kind of agreement that if things didn't go out, they'd get to be US patriots and they'd earn their citizenship. So, come on, let's actually be real with what's happening. We wage war on half of the known world. We just don't do it formally, and we don't do it by shooting people. Instead, we find people who hate each other and give them weapons so that they can kill each other and then eventually become strong enough so that we can go, look, we gotta go kill those strong evil people over there. That's how we do it. And we've been doing that since Afghanistan. And we still lie to this day about how that war actually started. The reality is, we baited the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan by arming the Mujahideen. At the time, terrorists, rebellions, Islamist extremists, whatever you want to call them. And then that baited the Soviets into invading. But we made it look like the Soviets just randomly invaded for no reason. And now, you know the fucked up part? Us Americans, we don't study our history. So now we're doing the same shit in Ukraine and Russia. And we're just swallowing that pill. We're like, yeah, he's trying to take over the world. Fuck him, he's evil. And it's like, come on. He tried to join NATO for multiple years. We are bringing the world to war. And this is our culture. And this is why I'm telling you that the formal education system has collapsed. It's been replaced by a profit industry that is deeply entrenched with many other industries that earn a lot of money from, at the end of the day, warmongering, exploitation of the masses. And we often get tricked into it. And you listening to this, you probably haven't been tricked into the Israel-Gaza situation. I'm sure you imagine that that is absurd, right? Like maybe you don't believe it's a actual genocide, you know, you're not comfortable with that. You haven't had the time to educate yourself about what's actually been happening for 60, 70 years. You don't know any of that. So it's hard for you to imagine that we live in a time where the things we learned about the Jews in the Germany country in the World War II era, you know, when people were like, how did people deny that? I remember being in class learning about this, and other students would ask questions, right? Because I was too shy, I didn't ask questions back then. And the questions would be like, how did people not do anything about this? How did this happen? You know, blah, 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 blah. And now look what we're doing here, huh? You think we've really improved? If you're an adult, can you look your kid in the eye and tell them that the world is a better place where freedom and democracy are valued notions? Can you really say that and believe it? Because I can't. I can't hear the word freedom and democracy without seeing all the things that I've seen in my life. Seeing how my father died because of insurance things. We had to pay for it. He couldn't get insurance because he was already sick, right? That was $70,000 my mom had to spend working. And why? Imagery, money, careers. Our society values money and the image of a career above life itself, above our own bodies, above our own happiness, above our family. So, next time you say that you really care about your family and you have to work hard and you're providing for them, really look yourself in the eye and say it again and again, because you better mean it. Because it is a true tragedy to work your ass off and be unavailable for your children, and then for them to end up having all these problems because they didn't get time from you as a kid because they haven't been educated about what humanity really needs, all right? And here's the actual, let's say, solution. Because it is actually quite simple. We have overcomplicated the world by making it seem as if everybody who has a college degree deserves to be okay, and everybody who doesn't is a piece of shit who deserves to die. That's how we treat the rest of the world. And okay, maybe I shouldn't be so harsh. Everybody who doesn't have a college degree, oh, we need to feel bad for them. Or we need to feel like, oh, why did they make such bad decisions? Why aren't they as good as us, who got educated? Blah, blah, blah. You know, F that. We're all humans. And the problem with our world is that we lack compassion for one another. I don't give a shit whether you're educated or a street worker. If you can look me in the eye and smile without hatred, I will treat you well. You deserve respect because you are a human. It doesn't matter what language you speak. Not even a human, a creature. Like, you know, we are so disrespectful because we don't educate our children the actual skills that they need to exist in the modern era. And the reason I've brought all of this war stuff and the propaganda and all this nonsense is because you have to understand that. Because the people who make the decisions about the education systems and our governing and all of these things, they are from an era that no longer exists. We are not in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell, as I mentioned, one of the reasons was because we baited them into a war. If you don't believe me, what's the name you need to look up? Makaczynski? Something like that. He freaking wrote a memo about it. He told the truth years later, like decades later. He said, oh yeah, that was on purpose. We did that. We armed them before they invaded. My point here is that this is the mentality that actually runs our world. Our education system and all of these things and most of these companies are ran by people who still live in this old world. And we are waging war on the rest of the world as if this still exists. And it's come at great consequence because we are destroying our public image. We are destroying our worldwide conventional wisdom. And because of this failure of our education system, we have created millions of young Americans who are increasingly killing themselves, increasingly developing opiate addictions, increasingly alcoholic. It is rough to be a young person in the Americas, especially because your parents have no fucking idea. They think that all you need is just to get an education because they lived in a time where you could get a high school diploma and get a job with it. And then you could work for 5 to 10 years, save up and buy a house without a mortgage. Whoa, that's insane. And so to them, you got to be understanding with your parents because they just don't get it. They're too busy, they have to work a lot, and they haven't educated themselves about the reality of the economic circumstance in most of the younger developing world. It's rough to be a young person compared to how it used to be. And we don't seem to acknowledge that. The young people get it, right? They understand that, like, hey, you know, inflation and all these things, I feel like it didn't used to matter so much, you know? Like, these kind of things eat people up. I remember growing up, inflation and all these issues just wasn't a thing in the US. Like, yeah, there was a little bit of inflation, but you would hear stories like, yeah, my grandfather, when he ate a hamburger, it was 25 cents at McDonald's, right? That's how Americans talk about inflation. At least, that's how they used to talk about inflation when it was a problem that didn't really show itself. Whereas now, everybody knows about inflation because most people can't get the same stuff from 2 years ago that they can get now, right? So that's the irony, is all of these things that we supposedly have protected ourselves from, our war on drugs, our war on terror, yet what happened to the terror? We're being terrorized still. And the crazy thing is, the terrorists in the United States aren't Islamic. They're people like this. They're young, white men who shoot up schools with assault rifles because they're so fed up with their existence. And this is what I'm getting at, is that because of this disconnect that we have created between the youth and the older generation in the United States, I don't know what's going to happen there, because the older generation is just cruising along doing the same stuff, and they don't seem to understand that they have lost the belief of the young Americans in a way that is going to produce problems. If you're surprised that people are getting violent in the US, like that Luigi guy, right? He killed a CEO and people supported it. Think about that for a second. I do not support that at all. I do not believe in being violent to cause anything to happen. I think that it ends up perpetuating more of what you're complaining about. That being said, I'm not an idiot, and I can tell when something's wrong. And the way that this is working, right? He assassinated somebody. And suddenly, there's all these documentaries about the abuses of the insurance companies, and everybody's talking about it, and the media is talking about it. How fucked up are we that we don't pay attention to this shit? That, like I said, has been around for ages. My dad died from something like this ages ago. That's so long ago that I can calmly talk to you about my dead dad in any detail with vivid imagery and not get beat up about it. That's how long this has been an issue. Yet, oh no, nobody gave a shit until somebody murdered a CEO. And this, again, is another flag that we have failed. We have failed the young generation. Our education system is not an education system. Therefore, the adults emerge as adults with zero life skills. They don't have the trauma skills. They don't have the diplomatic skills to manage a relationship. They are incredibly lonely. They're suicidal in many cases, and they're often addicted to drugs. This is what we've created. We've created a generation of more problems. And if you think it's getting better, it's not. With AI and screen time the way it is, and the increased costs of having children, people are increasingly pushed to be even more absent from their children. And this is what I'm getting at. When I say our education system has fundamentally failed, I mean that we raise children into this world who do not know how to behave. They do not know how to deal with trauma in life. Therefore, when they become adults and they start experiencing something traumatizing, they do not know how to handle it. They have no experience with it, and they get fucked up. They get on pills, all sorts of stuff happens. And can you blame them? Where were their parents growing up? Well, they weren't around because they had to be working. Always look at the childhood of the problem, and you will always find the answer. Every single time. And this is part of how we have failed, because our culture, as a people, we refuse to take responsibility for our children. When our child does something wrong, we distance ourselves from that child. We think, oh, that's just what happens. Sometimes children develop drug addictions. Sometimes they become homeless people and do a bunch of heroin and die. Oh, no, actually now people want heroin because everyone's on fentanyl and benzos, and it's horrific, and people just die in the streets, and it's horrible. And as a young person, if you're listening to this now, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that you've been so misled, because it would have been a lot easier for you if we were just truthful to you from the beginning. This world isn't just bad, but we've lied so much about it that it creates this huge wall of cognitive dissonance, and it's too scary for most people to go through. Most Americans are not ready to start looking about the history of our foreign policy and how deeply we contradicted every single one of our values, and how we still continue to do this today. And most Nicaraguan people are also not willing to understand these things. They view this stuff as Sandinista propaganda. And we have successfully leveraged an entire generation of young Nicaraguans against their parents in many situations. We have created rifts in families, and a situation where people are completely dependent on us. And it's tragic to be here in this country and to look people in the eye and to see them truly idolize the country that I came from. I know so many young Nicaraguan people who believe in democracy. They believe in the US values. And every single time, they don't know the history. And the tragic part is you don't even need to look up controversial sources. Everything I've learned is directly from CIA.gov. All you need to do is just read the training resources, see what we did here. It becomes pretty simple once you understand that we have a strategy, a very simple strategy, and we've been using it even till today. You hear about nuclear weapons and freedom and democracy and women's rights and all this, but none of that is really what's happening. What happens is we have interests, right? And there are foreign nations, and Americans tend to not give a shit about foreign nations. So, all we have to do is find a small group of US people in the government, often unelected, who have some kind of connection to some kind of company somewhere. And then before you know it, you have a situation where a handful of people in a room are in control of influencing a war, undeclared, against a little country in Latin America. If you think what we've done in Nicaragua is bad, honestly, I don't even know if it's the worst of it. At least Nicaragua, has an interesting history in the sense that they fought back, and the people, the Sandinistas, how they formed was by overthrowing our Somoza dictator. As Reagan put it, Somoza may be a bastard, but he's our bastard. That's a direct quote, okay? So the government here formed by overthrowing an American-backed dictator who was doing all the things we talk shit about, okay? And then we then proceeded to wage war until this very day. We continue to wage war in Nicaragua. And that's why when you go to the U.S. Embassy in Nicaragua in these things, it's all the way up on a hill. It's like a military outpost, pretty much. And also, they constantly give you warnings as a U.S. citizen. They're constantly often saying, don't come here, don't go out on this day, don't do this, don't do that. You know why? Because they know you shouldn't be here. We're trying to destabilize the government. That's what it means when we say regime. It means we are paying locals to harm locals. That's how we work. That's how we fund things. That's how we operate. That's how we've been doing it for a very long time. And I don't know if that's going to change, to be honest. I really don't. And so my solution to you for why our education system is failing is pretty simple. You have to spend time with your children. You must, at all costs, be available to them. And I understand that might not be easy. I understand that you might have to make sacrifices of what you believe in and what other people think about you and your image, right? So that you can be there for your children. But if you fail them, if you fail to be there for your kid, or fail to find someone else who can be, they will grow up to have all of the same problems that we're witnessing in the current generations and more. Because the kids now, they have even more temptation with phones and apps. There are even more predatory companies. There's even more things trying to get into the kids, inject them with habits that cause them to make money for someone later on. There is a lot of pressure to form the child into a product. And if you do not protect your child from this, they will suffer. And if you think the best thing you can give your child is a college education, I damn hope that you didn't do it in exchange for the time of day. Because that's the only thing that really, truly matters. If you are present with your child and you are there for them, you listen to them, you ask them questions, you engage with the things that they are interested in, None of this living vicariously through them and their grades so your image can be good. Know that when you do that, your child suffers. Children are simple, and we fuck them up with our education and what we call it. They are incredibly intelligent. They can learn anything. They are very powerful. And we subdue them. We suppress them. We turn them depressed. Don't spend time with your kid over this notion that you're a failure if you don't provide them a college degree. I'm here to tell you that in my eyes, in this one human's eyes, if you spend time with your child, I don't give a shit whether you never give them a college degree, even if you can't even feed them properly sometimes. That is the most important thing. And our world might go back to war because of this ignorance, because of how uneducated we are about how humanity itself works and what we really need. We lack compassion for one another, and we fail our children by not being there for them. That's all it takes. You just have to be present with your kid and put that above everything else in your life, above the imagery of your career, above what your family thinks, above everything else. And then the kid will be okay. And I can tell you this because that's what happened to me. I have a dead dad, right? But because of the way my mother and my father were in the first 10 years of my life, I'm a person who appreciates things. I'm happy. I love, like, gardening and taking care of animals and being there for them and supporting them. It brings so much joy to my life, and such simple things like this flower right here. This is called Malinche. It's there all the time. It's a tree that's incredibly easy to grow, and it's so beautiful. And they're amazing. These things are what we should be doing, living our life, enjoying the simple things, because life is so short, so incriminatingly short. And it is such a true tragedy to see all of these people rushing through their lives as if they're not going to die. And they let the moments pass them by, worried about careers in the future, the car they don't have, the partner they don't have. Everybody's obsessed with all the things they lack, while they live in one of the wealthiest, richest countries in the world. We've failed. It's time that we accept that. Otherwise, things are going to get a lot worse.